The rumor mill is spinning on the Pittsburgh Steelers, maybe trading for a playmaker wide receiver. We'll talk about that possibility, Roman Wilson, and a lot of other parts of this offense here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Nick Farabaugh of SteelersNow.com. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things in the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making us your first listen every day, because we're your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app today, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. As I said before, we're joined by the man himself. It's Nick Farabaugh in the house. Back here from SteelersNow.com. He was grinding all through the draft along with Alan Saunders and our buddies over there. Nick, how you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm still lagged from that weekend, man. I'm telling you, I'm still lagged. I think we pumped out over 100 stories over the weekend over there. So we really did grind through that draft, man. So I'm ready to talk now. Apparently we have post-draft frenzy. That was also pre-draft frenzy.
Yeah.
Same stuff, but hey, you still got holes on the team, so.
Absolutely. And we'll get to Roman Wilson in a bit because we're still post-draft week. But I wanted to address this because all of this kind of kicked up with the whole Bryant McFadden tweet. Bryant McFadden, former Steelers cornerback, also current member of the media. He tweets out something to the effect of like, oh, the Steelers are going to work. Omar Khan's got something cooking. Then our guy Doran Dickerson at 93.7 The Fan said, the Steelers are trying to make a move there. And then all the rumors started cracking up. Like, we started hearing, is it Aiyuk again? Is it Deebo Samuel? Dan Orlovsky tweeted that name out, Deebo Samuel. Then there was Devontae Adams, though I quickly put that to bed because I reached out to some people I know over the Raiders, and they were like, yeah, that ain't happening. So there's a lot of different directions here. But if I look for 4 reasonable players the Steelers could try to add from situations, I came up with 4 names. And Nick, I'm going to put you on the spot. I want you to rank the possibility or the likelihood of getting these guys by the names I give you here. 1 is a name we're familiar with, Brandon Aiyuk. People were talking about that pre-draft. 2, his partner, Deebo Samuel, who I think we haven't been talking about as much because he's been signed to his deal. And there's maybe a little bit more questions there. But then 3, we're going to talk about 2 receivers that Russell Wilson's throwing touchdown passes to. One is D.K. Metcalf from the Seattle Seahawks. And then the 4th one is Courtland Sutton out of the Broncos. There's been some rumblings that maybe he's on the way outs there. Those 4 right now, who's the most likely of those 4 do you think the Steelers could actually trade for?
I still think it's Courtland Sutton.
Oh, boy.
I think I would go 1 Sutton, 2 Deebo, 3 Aiyuk, 4 DK. The DK stuff makes no sense to me. I have no idea why they would do that. They are a win now mode right now, with Geno's contract kind of running out soon. They just restructured Lockett, and DK's still not even 27 years old. It just doesn't make much sense to trade him. If you're going to trade a receiver there, you trade Tyler Lockett, who's clearly the older of those 2 receivers, but he's not going anywhere. So I just don't see that. Aiyuk, I still think the 49ers know better. And what I mean by know better is he's the better of the 2. And they would rather extend him and trade Deebo than trade Aiyuk and keep Deebo. That's kind of what I think is going to end up happening there. So that's why Deebo's second. If the Aiyuk contract stuff just completely goes south and he's like, no chance am I ever coming back here. I don't know what would have to happen there. I still think that's going to go for a while and maybe bleed into training camp even. So to me, the Aiyuk stuff's going to take a while if it does materialize. I think Deebo being traded makes some sense just because, this is his last year of guaranteed money on his contract. So he's going to have, they're going to have flexibility eventually to move him. And they drafted Ricky Pearsall, and Jawan Jennings is in the last year of his deal, but will need a contract. If you trade Deebo, you can extend Jawan Jennings on top of Aiyuk. So I kind of see it there, but Courtland Sutton makes the most sense to me. I know that, there have been reports that out of Denver that they don't want to trade him. I get it. You have a rookie quarterback. Sure. You want to make Bo Nix, have the most comfortable environment. But Courtland Sutton still wants a contract. I think he has $2 million guaranteed money left. He ain't playing on that. So what, there's been conflicting reports. The Denver side is probably hearing it from the org is they're not trading him. The other side is probably Courtland Sutton and his agent saying, we're not staying here if they don't pay us. So are they going to pay him or not? Or is this going to deteriorate quickly? If they don't want to pay Courtland Sutton, he's 29, I believe. So he's going to be a little older pretty soon. So I think, Sutton still remains the likeliest of those four options. Wouldn't surprise me at all if the 49ers just wing it this year and kind of go with Deebo and Aiyuk and all of those guys this year, and then maybe trade Deebo next offseason. I could see that happening. But I do think Sutton's the likeliest here just because even though they don't have intentions to trade him, it's the one I can see going south the easiest if they don't want to pay him.
I hear that entirely. I think that that when you look at a few factors here, Courtland Sutton adds up to make the most sense for the Steelers being the option there. For one, he has multiple ties to the current team right now. One, he caught touchdown passes from Russell Wilson. In fact, he caught 10 touchdown passes last year for the Denver Broncos. I don't think all of them were from Russell Wilson, but still decent amount of them. So there's an obvious connection there for the Steelers. But also, new Steelers wide receiver coach, Zach Azzanni, was just coaching him very recently. So there'd be multiple ties there. Zach Azzanni could say, hey, I'm bringing in my guy. And that way you have a veteran who can kind of be the overlying figure for George Pickens. And then that way, if George Pickens doesn't work out, you at least have a veteran on the team that does it. But I think that, again, the situation here that I keep bringing up is the Steelers, I think, want to get a playmaker wide receiver who they might not necessarily have to pay long-term and could ruin the chance to sign George Pickens long-term if he turns out to be a number one type of guy. And Courtland Sutton, again, fits here very well. Why? Because his current contract runs out in 2025, the very year that George Pickens' contract runs out. And if the Steelers traded for him from Denver, most likely, the traditional trades, unless the Steelers picked up some of the dead cap money, they would have to pay just the cap savings that the Broncos would give up. And that would be $7.7 million this year, $14 million the year after. And even if it is the full $17.8 million cap hit that Courtland Sutton would be next year, that would be a 1 year type of deal. And they'd have him for 2 seasons. And then that would not block up any efforts or finances that they need to invest towards George Pickens if they wanted to make him the long-term option. And I think that's, again, is the ideal situation. You get a guy who's turning 29 this year, a guy who has had success with your quarterback that knows his position coach on the team, can be a veteran leader on a team that's trying to get more veteran leadership on the offensive side of the ball. It just, all of that adds up very well. And it also takes pressure off Roman Wilson having to develop much faster and be a huge playmaker in your offense this year.
Yeah, I think, the Sutton contract demands kind of throw a wrench in that. Kind of how do you work around that?
That's
I think
a good point.
It's probably the guaranteed money that's really holding that up. Is he, if the Steelers trade for him and we're like, okay, we'll guarantee you year one, boom. Or would he be cool with that? I don't know. Does he want another year on that contract, or can they just guarantee so much money and still have it run out in 25? I think that's the question that would have to be answered for that. Because if he wants a new contract, I think that's obviously going to throw a wrench in that. I think Deebo's also lines up quite well just because this is his last year of guaranteed money. So after, this year, you can move off that contract if you wanted to at some point. But I also think Deebo is the type of receiver that I think he's the most atypical type that they probably would acquire. And what I mean by that is I think they want a big dude. I think they want a guy that is physical and imposing and a big outside receiver. And while Deebo is physical and certainly a great yak threat, I almost think they're looking for a Courtland Sutton or a guy that can do everything like Brandon Aiyuk or another big physical guy like DK Metcalf. Like those guys make sense. I think Deebo kind of fills the void, but maybe it doesn't fit the perfect archetype they want, which is that big physical kind of guy. Like they were very in on Mike Williams. I think that was very clear. So I think, he might be the least kind of atypical of what they're looking for, but he also might be the very, very well the most attainable. Where's this Aiyuk contract going to come in at, right? I mean, look at what AJ Brown got. Look at what Amon-Ra St. Brown got. CeeDee Lamb and Justin Jefferson are getting paid very soon. So is Jamar Chase.
Yeah.
So that Aiyuk contract, the longer the 49ers wait, the more Aiyuk's going to ask for. And so the more room they might have to make. And listen, that Deebo trade might have to happen for it to fit under eventually. You can have that low year one cap hit, but we'll kind of see. But I do think, Courtland Sutton kind of fits everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
Contract runs out at the right time. Chemistry with Russell Wilson, big type of receiver they were looking for. He's not a star, but he's a really solid 2. I think he kind of fits what they look for. So that's exactly why I think he's probably the likeliest.
I feel you on that here. It just adds up. It doesn't mean they're going to get him, but it makes me likely. Let's take a step back here. Let's take out likeliness, probability, all that. Nick, if you're Omar Khan, who's the guy you do want to get?
Ayuk, 100%. 100% Aiyuk is. We're talking about a route runner, great after the catch, still young and in his prime. He certainly is helped by the guys around him, but he's not just a creation of the San Fran offense. He does everything well. I mean, he's a top 10 receiver in the NFL right now. He's an alpha dog 1. What if George Pickens does take the leap this year and becomes a 1 himself? Then you got 2 1s. I think that's really where, it comes down to. Listen, if they're asking for a 25-1 for him, I think it's a costly matter, but I think it's perfectly fair, and he's the guy I would want to go get the most.
There you go. He's Nick Farabaugh. I want to talk to Nick about his read on Roman Wilson, where he ranks in, because I know a lot of people are like, wait a second, they just drafted a wide receiver. What about that guy? We'll talk about him in a minute here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Chris Carter, Nick Farabaugh. Stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, I want to remind you that this show is also brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and excellence. That's what brings home the winning trophy. It's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers to roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices that you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay's Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. We're also brought to you by Game Time. Buying tickets to your favorite events shouldn't be stressful. Let's say you're not here in Pittsburgh. Let's say you're listening to this everywhere, because listen, Steelers fans are everywhere. The NBA playoffs are here, and the Game Time app makes it so easy to get tickets to games all around the country. I personally can't wait for the Denver Nuggets to take on the Minnesota Timberwolves. It's going to be a throwdown between Jokic and Murray and Anthony Edwards and Carly Towns. It's going to be huge. But if you're into any of those games, go to Game Time. It's the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all your sports, music, comedy, and theater events you're new. Let's say you're in Pittsburgh. It's a great way to go check out PNC Park, an amazing ballpark with the Pittsburgh Pirates here. We also have several concerts in Pittsburgh right now, like the Kenny Chesney concert coming up or maybe you want to go and see WWE Friday Night SmackDown coming Friday, May 10th. All that available in Game Time, the best place to go get tickets right now. And Game Time's best price guaranteed means you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less somewhere else, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Snag the tickets without the stress with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase, or go to their website, gametime.co. Terms and conditions apply. Create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Back here in the Locked On Steelers podcast, Chris Carter here with Nick Farabaugh of SteelersNow.com. All right, Nick, when the Steelers drafted Roman Wilson 84th overall, I thought they got great value for who I think was a good receiver in this NFL draft class. I ranked him 45th on my personal top 100 big board. They got him at 84th. Nick Farabaugh, was Roman Wilson the pick at wide receiver that you thought was worthy of that pick at there? And or was there a different direction you thought the Steelers should have gone with that pick?
I think he was a really good pick for them. I liked other guys that were still on the board. Like, I like Jalen McMillan. I like Javon Baker. I was a Troy Franklin fan, but not really for the Steelers. I didn't really see the fit for Troy Franklin with them. I saw the fit very clearly for Roman Wilson. You're talking about a speed threat that is a great willing blocker.
Yeah.
Has done a lot of similar things. Like, he played in a very similar offense. You talk about kind of the cheat motion that Arthur Smith uses. He took that from the 49ers, obviously. Roman Wilson did that in college. Motioning in from outside into the slot, into condensed formations. That's what you do. Crossers. Ran a ton of crossers in that Michigan offense. You're going to run a lot of crossers in this Arthur Smith offense. Did most of his production between the numbers. Has great hands. He's tough. I think it makes a lot of sense, And I think the one thing, the distinction about outside versus inside in Arthur Smith's offense is a little different. And the reason I say that is because of the amount of condensed formations he uses. You can get slots to be outside guys through motion, through formation alignments. You can play like Roman Wilson's not going to have to face press if Pat Frymuth's up on the point, right? Like he's going to be kind of behind him and you could sneak him around on crossers. I think the way I would describe him is a speedy dot, like all over the field. Like that's what Roman Wilson does. And it's to his detriment sometimes too, because I don't think he knows what route pacing is. Like he just runs, boom, full speed all the time.
It's full speed, yeah.
It's 100% that. So, I think if he kind of nuances it a little bit and kind of switches up his speed and pace, I think he becomes a really fun player. Very quick and out of breaks. He creates separation. There's no doubt about that. And he wins over the middle of the field. Those crossers, when they bring him in motion and send him on a crosser, they're going to be able to get him open. So I like Roman Wilson. I thought this guy was a second-round player. Worthy of that. So I definitely think they got great value here. I really like Roman Wilson. I'm not sure of I think he can eventually play outside. He doesn't really deep press very well yet, but I think that can be in his bag. I think he has like an intriguing release package that's starting to show up, but it's not fully there. So this is why, year one, you're like, okay, can you get an outside guy that can kind of fill that void? And that's why they're talking about adding this third receiver. But I think Roman Wilson's a good player that can do a lot of things in this Arthur Smith offense. He'll play right away, and he'll give them some very nice production in between those numbers on those crosses.
Listen, that's where I've been on Roman Wilson is that, first of all, I loved his explosiveness. I loved his ability to get loose against defenders. I thought, you saw his speed when he hits the seam. He is so tough, and he's another guy. And I think he also possesses more route versatility than a Calvin Austin, which is where I think a lot of people are going to be saying, well, what about Calvin Austin's speed? Like you point out, his blocking is certainly a factor there. The one thing is, if you line him up on the outside, how will he do when an NFL corner tries to press him at the line of scrimmage, jam him, and keep him from getting into his routes? That's something I'm not sure about yet, but that's, again, like you said, if you go get another wide receiver who can start on the outside, that allows you to use Roman Wilson a lot more in the slot, allow him to motion him around the field a lot more. And then you can get him in some great mismatch situations where I think that he becomes an asset to the team. And maybe even become a number 2 wide receiver for George Pickens in the next few years, or maybe even someday the number 1 wide receiver if Pickens don't work out. Like that's the thing. Like I don't think people should sleep on the potential of Roman Wilson becoming that guy. I think that he is a potential future, real talent at wide receiver. He has things he needs to grow in, but he has the makings of being a playmaker in today's NFL.
Yeah, I think he's a good player. I think Senior Bowl Director Jim Nagy's comp for him is Tyler Lockett. Just kind of weird that, that's a guy that has been talked about a lot. Russ obviously has used Tyler Lockett a ton and likes that type of receiver. I do think also, I think he's a different type of receiver from what Arthur Smith had last year in Atlanta. You look at what Arthur Smith had in Atlanta, and nobody really was like Roman Wilson.
Right.
I think Pickens can be Drake London, but who's going to be Roman Wilson? No one was. So he's an interesting player because you watch what he does from those condensed sets, and all he does is win over the middle of the field. I think another thing that I really love about Roman Wilson is his ability to kind of decipher zone coverage and just drop in like the open spot. Like he is a wide open target. He catches everything that's even within his grasp. I mean, the lack of drops in his game, and I don't just mean like charted drops. I mean like contested catch. He's going to get smacked. He catches the ball, man. He's got vice grip hands. I think that is really going to help them. He's going to be the guy that can win underneath as a chain mover or over the middle of the field as a space eater. When that post safety takes George Pickens, Roman Wilson's going to make you pay underneath. Like that's what he is. And so I think he offers them a lot of nice versatility from those condensed stack sets and kind of what he can do against zone coverage. He can be a third down chain mover, I think, out of 11 personnel. And so really what they need is that one other guy, that big guy on the outside, when they go 11 personnel, I know people are like, okay, they only use 2 receivers in the Art Smith offense. True, but if you're going to want to beat Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, all these kind of teams, you're going to need to be able to play 11 personnel when you're down and be able to kind of come back. I think Roman Wilson fits that very well too. He's going to be a really good slot out of those areas. So I look at Roman Wilson. I think he's a good player. I don't think he's going to be all that we're talking him to be yet in year 1, but I do think he can be a really good player down the line, and he can be a solid player that can come in year 1 and give you solid contributions as a wide receiver 3.
That's where I'm kind of with you. Is that like it's going to take him time to get up to speed and become that guy? But it took a lot of guys. It took Hines Ward time to become who he became. It's taking George Pickens time. Like George Pickens honestly showed a lot of promise already last year. Even with the quarterback play the Steelers had, he still put up over 1,000. He still had good numbers. But you look over the past, like Antonio Brown took him years until he became that Antonio Brown. And again, not saying Roman Wilson's on any of their particular paths, but saying it takes time for guys to develop, and I think it's going to be there. But if let's say that he turns out to be the number 2 guy to Pickens, do you think these two complement each other well with what they do? Just the way, because Deontay Johnson was one of the best separators in the NFL, while George Pickens was one of the best go up and get it guys in the NFL. Is there a way that you see it also working out in a similar way for the Steelers, where there's one thing that Roman Wilson does very well that can make defenses have to worry about him in such a different way than they worry about Pickens?
I think to a degree. I do think obviously the speed over the middle, the zone coverage stuff, the great hands, the underneath stuff complements George very well. I also think something that made Deontay so good as a pairing with George was Deontay's ability to beat press. So you couldn't single up Deontay Johnson. And if you did, he was going to make you pay. So I don't know if Roman Wilson's going to be that this year. In the future, I think they have the ability to do that. I think they have the ability to be a great 1-2 punch. But I do think Roman Wilson right now is a guy that probably needs a year, to work on his releases, kind of, understand route pacing, defeat press coverage, become truly inside-out versatile. When Deontay came in, Deontay Johnson, I've watched a lot of receivers over my time scouting. When he came out to Toledo, he was one of the most polished press beaters I've seen. I mean, he could discard press all over his film. Roman Wilson hasn't done that yet, and most of his snaps came from the slot. So I think say they don't add anybody, and it's just Roman Wilson, George Pickens, I think they're going to have to be a lot more creative with their schematics and how they get Roman Wilson free. But if they can get him free on motion and into condensed sets and kind of how they use this, and they can kind of shadow him and keep him off the line, I think he can be a really good complement to him in year 1. I think year 2 and beyond, which is where you would anticipate Roman Wilson to take that leap to play inside out, that could be an extremely deadly duo. I do.
Yeah, it certainly could be one. That's why I liked him in the draft. I thought he would complement well. And here's the thing, again, like you give yourself 2 years to figure out, is he the guy or is Pickens the guy that you get? Here's the thing. Let's say Roman Wilson turns out to be that dude, and George Pickens, maybe his attitude sours, maybe he doesn't could grow, maybe he runs into some Chase Claypool problems. I'm not saying that they will. I'm just saying that let's say the Steelers have to account for that possibility there. And Roman Wilson becomes your guy. Well, and guess what? Then you just don't pay George Pickens, let him hit free agency, and then you go and get another young receiver that you try to build up behind Roman Wilson. But I think he's a good fit for multiple reasons. And I also heard he's a good locker room guy, which is another thing that I think they've been looking for across the board. I want to talk about this though, Nick. Let's say the Steelers, whether it's Roman Wilson, Deebo Samuel, D.K. Metcalf, Justin Jefferson, let's just say the Steelers get someone develops into being that other wide receiver who's a playmaker for them for this year. What does that do to their offensive ranking in the NFL? We'll talk about that next here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Chris Carter, Nick Farabaugh, stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, I want to remind you this show is also brought to you by Monopoly Go. All right, game off. we got to pause here to talk more about Monopoly Go. And I know some of you are saying, hey, flag on the play. You've been talking about Monopoly Go. You've been excited about it. We get it. There's just so much good stuff in this game. But listen, there is just so much good stuff in this game. Monopoly Go is a game that you could download right now on your phone. You can team up with friends for time tournaments where you work together to build up each other's boards. The more that you win together, the more awesome prizes that you can unlock. There's so much to get too. You can get unique stickers that you can trade with friends to compete to complete albums for big prizes. You could get cool new playing pieces to travel the boards with, and hilarious emojis to taunt friends when you smash their buildings or heist their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. A ton include their own unique mini games like digging for treasure or a robot pachinko machine. Then there's also always new timed events that help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything you win or rent frenzies. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go, so go get off the bench and go download right now Monopoly Go on Google Play or the App Store. Game on. This episode brought to you by Monopoly Go. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, Chris Carter, Nick Farabaugh from SteelersNow.com. All right, Nick, the Steelers, let's say they get somebody, Courtland Sutton, or Roman Wilson develops into that guy, and Calvin Austin's the number 3, which I think a lot of people are also like, go count on Calvin Austin. We're not doing that. We're just being realistic here. But let's say that a number 2 receiver on this team develops. George Pickens a solid number 1, and everything's looking at it this year. The question I wonder is, where does this Steelers offense rank after that? Because last year they finished the year ranking 28th overall, just in scoring. Like they didn't put up points on the board, and honestly, that was boosted a little bit by having back-to-back 30-point games at the end of the season when Mason Rudolph came in. But this year, they're upgrading their offensive line through the draft. I think we could all agree they upgraded their quarterback room through free agency. Maybe they've downgraded a wide receiver. We don't know what's going to be the final picture there with Deontay Johnson gone. Maybe Roman Wilson turns into something special, but that's going to be there. But let's say that the number 2 receiver emerges and you're not hurting as much as wide receiver for losing Deontay Johnson. How high up do you think the Steelers could finish ranked in scoring offense in the NFL this season?
It's an interesting question because, as you mentioned, QB upgrades, O-line upgrades. If receiver isn't, a downgrade, at that point, I think you're cooking with something there because there's still going to be questions about Russ and Fields and kind of what they do, and Arthur Smith too, right? Still has questions about the OC. If things work out, the way they could with that, especially with the really solid run game, with the ability to hit, play action deep shots and explosives, I'm not going to say they're going to be like an elite offense. I don't think they will be, but I think they can be a pretty league average offense, which is just like astronomically better than what we have seen over the past few years. I think they could be a legitimate offense that can score points. Like, I'm not like 16th in the league, 14th in the league, somewhere around that spot. Like, that's where I would envision them being, because I still think they're going to have growing pains with Fautanu and Frazier, even though they're really good players. And even if Wilson emerges, right, all those rookies at some point are still going to probably have growing pains. They're rookies. It's just something that happens. The offense is probably going to have some growing pains with a new OC. It happens. So some of that's just going to have, just kind of work itself out. But this has a potential to be a dominant run game. It really does. If the passing game is working off that and teams can't stack the box and start giving them favorable boxes, I think it's, really you're kind of cooking with something there if you get him with explosives over the top. So it could be an efficient offense that really hits well. So I'm thinking, league average to slightly above average is where you kind of put that as, because we don't really have the variable on how good Russ or Fields or Smith would be, who I think are still 2 questions we don't have to answer. So I'm kind of, cautiously putting them slightly above league average.
So here's the thing. That would be a very good spot for them to be in. That's all I said last year that they needed to be, because I was saying like, hey, I was saying, hey, if you hate Matt Canada, that's fine. But his goal is to make this team at least middle of the league in offense. He didn't. He's gone. That's what we said what would happen if it didn't happen. If it didn't happen, that was going to be his last year. It wasn't even his last whole year because he got cut in the middle part of the season. But let's say they're just above league average. So league average is 16. So we're saying just above, let's say 14th in the NFL in scoring offense. 14th actually, technically, it's Thursday. There was two teams tied for 13th, 22.2 points per game. That's the Texans and the Jaguars. Just ahead of, by the way, the Chiefs, who were at 15th with 21.8 points per game. If you're able to get that, while also the defense staying at the level that it was at. Remember, the defense ranked, I think, 6th in scoring defense this past year. Certainly, something that if you can maintain that and keep up what you're doing there defensively wise, the Steelers are in a good position. Just looking at their rankings, last year they ranked 6th with 19.1 points per game. Let's say you keep that up. The Steelers were what, 10-7 last year with one of the worst offenses in the NFL and made the playoffs. Imagine with, like you said, just that mediocre, not mediocre, like a balanced offense that finishes just above the average in the league, and still a top 10 defense. That can be what makes it work. That could be makes it tick. And I bring up this stat because I often talk about the run game being a difference. If you take in from Broderick Jones's when he became a consistent starter for the last 10 games of the season, the Steelers had the number 2 rushing offense, only behind the Baltimore Ravens during that span. But I also want to give this a point. Up to that point, when the Steelers, when looking at time of possession, up to that Week 9 game against the Packers, when Broderick Jones became a consistent starter, the Steelers ranked dead last in time of possession. And that's something that Mike Tomlin hated and he always talked about. But by the end of the season, the Steelers ranked 17th in time of possession. So they jumped up in just the second half of the season simply because Broderick Jones was plugged into the line. They jumped up from being dead last in the league to almost already halfway there. So to your point, I think with even more improvement in the offensive lines and even more improvement at the quarterback position and maybe another playmaker at wide receiver, you put yourself in a position to make another jump from there even. And I think that's the spot that the Steelers could be really comfortable from.
Yeah, I mean, listen, if we project that they would have a similar level defense, which seems reasonable, right?
Yeah, sure.
Upgrade inside linebacker, probably upgrade corner. We'll see what happens at slot, but upgrade the safety position with Deshaun Elliott. Like, okay, there's a few better players in that poll too. So if they can maintain the level they have, and that offense goes 14th, I mean, this is a playoff team, man. I mean, it might be a 10-7, 11-6 playoff team because if you look at the schedule the Steelers have, man, it's
yet another
brutal.
Year. Yeah, it's yet another tough year.
Yeah, but they will make the playoffs with that stuff. I would guarantee it. And I mean, you still have to factor in with some of these, there's going to be inherent negatives with some of this, even if they're an efficient run game and can hit explosive over the top. Russell Wilson and Justin Fields are historically terrible sack eaters. So you're naturally going to have some negativity that, maybe they didn't have last year where the negativity last year was that they would go 3 and out. Like that's what it was. But if you can if you can play ball control with the run game, hit some explosives in the run game, I think that's going to be something that they're going to want to look to do this year too. Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren down the stretch started to really hit more explosives out of the run game. I think they're going to want to do that. If they can do that, and you can minimize the weaknesses that both Fields and Wilson naturally have in their profiles, you can be a playoff team. You might even be able to draw a really favorable matchup and win a playoff game. Like that is very possible. It's not a Super Bowl contender, but what it is it can be a contender in the AFC playoffs and they can sneak a game out. Like that's very realistic to me. Arthur Smith's teams have done that before in Tennessee. They did that with Ryan Tannehill. So, and who's to say Russ can't be better than Ryan Tannehill this year? Now, I will say the one thing that I don't think we're accounting for yet in this whole conversation is Arthur Smith going to evolve? And why I say that is a lot of what he does offensively is not cater to the strengths of his players right now. Wide zone. Well, the Steelers have a very talented pulling kind of group of linemen between Sayamalo, Daniels, Frazier, Fatanu, and Jones. So, okay, are you going to bring in counter power and different gap schemes? I think the other thing is, he's not a big go ball guy. He's more of a post crosser type guy of play action. Well, Russ and George Pickens are elite go ball guys.
Exactly.
So can you cater the passing game a little bit more to Russ's strengths? Because there's one thing, Russ has lost a little bit of his athleticism, which is why he can't play, the backyard ball he used to in Seattle as much anymore, but he's still a great deep ball thrower. The arm is elite still. And you look at the film and he can rip that thing down the field, and he's a great deep ball thrower. So can you kind of cater that? If he can, and he did, I asked him about that kind of, at the draft, and he said he didn't want to get stale. He didn't want to hand out the playbook, that was a year ago or 4 years ago. Promising. Let's see it. If that happens, I think this team, man, has a chance to be pretty solid. And really, I think the offense will take a big step forward if these things kind of check into balance. So the personnel right now needs a wide receiver upgrade, but if that wide receiver emerges, I think the outlook is very promising.
I think that there's certainly a lot to like about the outlook there. And to your point about Arthur Smith, I agree that there's certainly questions. Everyone has questions. What is it going to be in Pittsburgh? Is it going to be more like the Falcons or more like the Titans with how he ran those offenses? And that's what everyone wants to see. But if he and this staff can come together and create a plan that's focused around the talents they have on this roster, I do think that this can be an offense that, like you said, at least ranks in the middle part of the league. And if it does that and keeps a top 10 defense, that's not only just a playoff team, that's a serious contender in the playoffs that I think can be a problem if you get matched up with the right guy at the right time. So all that being said, where the Steelers will go at wide receiver, we don't know yet, but we do know that they're interested, they're looking, and we're waiting to see what will happen there. He's Nick Farabaugh from SteelersNow.com. Nick, thanks so much for joining us here. Let people find you, follow you, and get more of your work.
Yeah, Chris, as always, thanks for having me on. You can follow me on X, Twitter at FarabaughFB. Make sure to read the stuff over at SteelersNow.com. We got a ton of great content pumping out post-draft and rookie camp, which will be in about 2 weeks. We'll have you covered from there.
Absolutely. He's Nick Farabaugh. I'm Chris Carter. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. Read my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette.com. Find me here on the Locked On Steelers podcast every day, Monday through Friday, breaking down your Pittsburgh Steelers right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Back tomorrow with more on your Pittsburgh Steelers right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.